I had a conversation recently with someone about diversity in the church and colonialism, and just kind of and racism in the church, and this is manifest racism in the church, at least in this person's opinion, and I kind of agree with this opinion, is manifest most nowadays in a lack of trust towards brown, native, or non-white people. So how it was manifested in the past is there was a priesthood ban. So people of African descent couldn't have the priesthood. That priesthood ban was established after Joseph Smith. So there were some African Americans before Brigham Young was prophet, who had the priesthood, such as Elijah Abel, and he was actually ordained to 70, and there was one or two others, but there was a period of time after Joseph Smith's martyrdom and until the 1970s when African Americans couldn't hold the priesthood. But you also see it in ways like the church doesn't invest the same way in other places, right? It doesn't invest the same way as it invests in Utah. There's no desert industries. There's no, and I guess in the United States in general. So it's not necessarily an issue of Mormon density, because the church has big farms, for example, and bishop storehouses in lots of places in the United States where the church isn't very dense. But we don't have big farms, and we don't have church storehouses in places like Nigeria or Ghana or India. The same way we don't invest in big universities in those other countries, the same way we invest in BYU Hawaii or BYU Idaho or BYU Provo. And you'll also see it in that, for example, sometimes you'll get policies where I have someone that I work with whose father, who's Indian, who from South India, and his father was a branch president, and the church, when he was branch president, required that there was a missionary there, American. It was almost always an American or white senior missionary there. Whenever they counted money, counted the tithing funds, there was kind of a lack of trust that the native Indians would do it appropriately, that they would count it correctly. Also, the church preaches the gospel usually in colonial languages. Like, so if you go to Africa, they usually don't have the missionaries preaching in Yoruba or Igbo or even in Swahili. They have them preaching in English and in French. And also there's things like the Deseret News is sponsored by the church, but it's a fairly, as far as news sources go, it's a fairly conservative news source. But yeah. So what progress has been made since the church is founded? Because yeah, I want to look at the progress. One, the priesthood ban was no longer. Investment in infrastructure in other countries, at least in terms of temples, is increasing, and in other instances is sometimes increasing too, but at least in terms of temples, we are investing in other countries outside the United States. And investment in Utah has changed. The church isn't sponsoring like department stores and several other businesses. The church has divested itself on, and it's focused more on the religious things, which is a little bit frustrating to some people, because I think that would help a lot in South Africa or in very poor countries if the church created businesses the way that it used to in Utah for the Latter-day Saints. But the church has decided to go in another direction where it's investing less in Utah, which makes sense. We don't need it as much in Utah. But it's not necessarily investing in businesses the same way that it invested in Utah, if that makes sense. but investment in Utah has reduced and the church has refocused. So I guess it's being more fair. There is more non-Utah, non-white leadership in the church. Even in the 12 apostles, we have a couple of people from other countries, non-Americans, and so it's better. It's definitely not in proportion to the membership of the church. Most members of the church live outside the United States, and most apostles, most of the church leadership is from the United States. But it's getting better. It's progressing. And most of the discrepancies, you can find an explanation that isn't based on race. For example, you could say, well, maybe the church isn't creating businesses in certain countries because of government corruption, or because of the density of members, or because or maybe they had more things in Utah just because of history, just because the church was at a different historical point, right, where it was cast out, and so the people had to rely on the church in order to live, but they don't have to rely on the church in order to live in other places. There's more access to more global programs such as BYU Pathways. In order to get access to Brigham Young University, they have made ways for people in other countries to get access to certain educational programs through programs like BYU Pathways. And the number of languages that we are preaching the gospel in is increasing, even if it's not perfect yet. There's a lot more languages for us to go and to actually practically preach the gospel in. So I kind of view this as a process, as progress towards Zion. In the grand scheme of things, we've gone from slavery to segregation to a little bit, more of a Christ-like society in just a few lifetimes. So I've seen quite a bit of progress, but I do see that we aren't there yet. And it might take a few more lifetimes till we get there, until we're ready, because I think that in order to become a Zion-like people, in order to become ready, we need to be united in heart and mind. We need to not be judging people based on the color of their skin or on their accents. We need to be, we need to not be judging people at all. We need to be able to be in a place where we are loving people with a Christ-like love. And I don't think we're quite there yet. I think that we have a ways to go. And I don't know at what point in the timeline Christ comes. But if he's waiting for us to be prepared to get rid of, I wouldn't be surprised if he's waiting for us to get rid of quite a bit more racism and distrust of other peoples, just because they seem different than us, a different cultural background than us. He could be waiting for that. And yeah, that makes me sad a little bit, because I want Christ to come. So yeah.